Okay, we're at 2 minutes past, and we do have a pretty tight schedule today, so I am going to kick off. My name's Jade. I'm an account manager at Mixpanel, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the latest edition of the Mixpanel Innovators Behind the Product webinar series. To celebrate International Women's Day today, we're joined by a panel of highly accomplished female leaders in tech, who are going to share some of their experiences and insight with us on what it's like to be the women behind the product. Hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm just going to share a couple of housekeeping notes. We will be taking questions at the end if we have time. Hopefully we will. So please submit any questions that you have in the Q&A function in Zoom. The webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing it with everybody via email in the next 24 hours. And everybody should be muted on entry. If you are having issues with audio, the Zoom audio settings are at the bottom left of the screen, where the microphone icon is. And with that, I would like to hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves. We're very lucky to have these wonderful women with us today. So if we start, please, with Emily. You're at the top of my screen. Please introduce yourself for everybody.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Mollenbach. I'm currently the Director of UX and Design at a company called Issue, which is a publishing company. And I have a sordid past as a researcher, but I think I'm going to get into that maybe a little bit later.
And then Gina, you're next in my Zoom window.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here, and especially to see everyone from around the world. I'm joining you guys from Brazil today, where I'm from. I have a background in philosophy and neuroscience, but I ended up working in digital marketing because that was the only option I had to get a visa to live in the US, which is what I wanted to do. Ended up helping Tumblr grow in Latin America and leading the company in Brazil and elsewhere, and then starting a company to help tech companies grow in Latin America. And Duolingo was one of my first clients. They were very small, and then I joined in and helped them grow from 3 million to 200 million users as their head of marketing and growth. Last year, I worked on the Mike Bloomberg presidential campaign in the US. Again, my only way to impact the election, being Brazilian, not being able to vote. And I'm now focused on helping tech startups in Latin America succeed.
Thank you, Gina. And now next, Martina.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to see so many people joining, and also being the great company of these fabulous women. My name is Martina. I work in one of the biggest banks in Sweden, so I'm from Stockholm. And within the bank, we have been lately, during the past 3 years, started up you could say an in-house startup or new bank in the old bank. So we were 7 people starting out to establish that initiative, and today we've been growing a lot. So we are around 60 people. We have a product. We have a quite cool tech platform. And my role it's called SEBX, which is the X initiative then, has been changing a lot over the years, over these 3 years when we've been running it. So I've been involved in many parts of the product development and setting up the organization. So I've been running, cloud infrastructure establishment, data analytics parts, procurement pieces, marketing communications. And lately now I'm taking on the responsibility of what we call people and organization, which is in its essence HR basically. So growing the team sustainable and making sure we kind of build a workplace where people are their best versions of themselves, etc.
Thank you very much, Martina. And last but not least, Anna.
Hey everyone, I'm Anna. I'm the CEO of Code First Girls. Code First Girls is the largest community of female coders and technologists in the UK and Ireland. And what we do is we basically give women the skills to learn how to break into technology. We typically do that completely free of charge. And then we help women get into roles with many, many different types of companies, all the way from startups to sort of big banks and big insurance companies. But I'll talk a little bit more about me, I think a little bit later on. But I was going to ask before we move on, Emily, what are you holding in your picture? I have to know what that is.
I know it's.
I had the same question.
Okay, it was when I started my job. I've been thinking about taking it down because people ask questions. So when I started this job, we had this photo shoot where you have to have new pictures taken for your for the company website, and then there's kind of a joke picture that's taken. So this is the joke picture that's taken, and it's kind of it's a white, what do they call, a white whale, a white shot, like a white whale. And I just thought it was funny because you know, there's a couple of the old man and the sea, and then there's the, you know, the white whale and chasing the white whale, and so that, and for me the white whale represents the soul. I know this is going to get very hippie-ish very quickly, and so it had like a symbolic meaning for me, and then I was kind of like, don't take yourself too seriously, so I put it up. So that's the white whale that I'm holding in my hands, and I know it's just a teddy bear, but yeah, anyway.
I'm feeling jealous. I want a white whale in my picture, Emily.
Me too. I'm gonna change mine.
Curiosity, what you were holding in your picture, Emily. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, so I can see all of your faces. And Emily, we're going to stay with you if you don't mind, because as you alluded to, we did want to ask a little bit about your background and how you arrived where you are today, because you have had such a interestingly varied background in research, academia, data science, all the way through to product design and UX. So talk a little bit about that for us, if you could.
Yes, I'll do my best, and I'll try and make it hopefully relevant. So I actually started as a game designer, which is a very kind of specific type of design. So this is back in 2004. So it's a long time ago. And I was kind of part of the first group of game designers that got trained. So I have an MSc, I have a master's degree in game design. And that gave me a very kind of unique, I think, perspective, because games, it's programming, and it's data, and it's storytelling, and it's graphics. So it's kind of all of these like different practices within software engineering, but it's not one of them. So I'm a pretty shitty programmer, to be honest, and I'm not a particularly good graphic designer either, but I like putting it all together and making that experience and creating having that what's called UX today, but back in the day it was interaction design. So I started actually teaching interaction design while I was studying, and then it kind of rolled on from there, and I ended up doing a PhD in eye tracking, which was specifically the interaction design sort of HCI part of eye tracking, where it was focused on people with different motor skill disabilities, and how could you use eye tracking when it's used for a monomodal input, so it's your only input, how could you actually do interaction principles around that? And that sort of landed me in the space of eye tracking data, which I don't know if anyone has worked with eye tracking data. That you need to become a data scientist if you want to work with eye tracking data, because there's a lot of it, and if you want to sort of identify robust patterns. And so for all of my PhD and my first postdoc, I was doing a lot of programming and data science and experiments, and very kind of cognitive science, HCI, very kind of natural science approach, hypothesis, identifying variables, and then analyzing them. And then I had a bit of a shift in that I did a postdoc at Copenhagen University, where I was hired on this project that was run out of anthropology. And so I ended up doing 9 months of hardcore field work, but like 2 years basically of anthropological work, which there's always been an element of anthropology in interaction design, but that was just sort of taking that to the next level. So that was more about, I was working with a couple of municipalities in Denmark, and it was very much about social media and sort of this link between public policy and social media and behavioral psychology, and how do we do transformations within sustainability. So it was super interesting. And then
wide remit.
Pardon?
That's a very wide remit.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and so I was suddenly sort of that was a big mindset shift for me. And then I ended up as an assistant professor at a place called ITU, which was actually where I did my computer game degree back. So I sort of ended where I started. And there I sort of got into this full body interaction, which is something that I really loved. And I was working on a project with a science museum doing sort of an interactive cinematic experience with full body interaction. It was very cool. I was teaching interaction design still. And I think I got to the point where I was looking at an associate professorship, and it was kind of this, okay, I've just spent 10 years of my life in academia, which was amazing. And I won't say, I think I was a bit exhausted because it's a lot of work, and academia has this, it's sort of you can give everything you've got and it's still kind of almost not enough. And so I was kind of looking at this one job, and it was really the only job I had applied for outside of academia at the time, which was at Mobile Pay, which is a Danish fintech company, which is a sort of peer-to-peer payment platform. And they were looking for a sort of a UX lead. And I honestly didn't think I was going to get the job. So but I went to the interviews, and yeah, I'm not going to go into that story. I got the job. And then I was kind of like, well, it was such an opportunity, I felt, to jump from being in this incredible, rich, theoretical and applied, but like research applied way, and then moving into a company. And so I took that jump, and I'm super glad that I did. I found out that I absolutely love working in teams, and I love working with other talented designers. I was introduced to your platform, Mixpanel platform, and suddenly data was like this whole other living thing, and not something I had to program everything for, but it was something that I could really be creative with. Yes, and then recently, about 6 months ago, I got the opportunity to join Issue, which is another very, very cool platform that really needs and knows that it needs kind of UX love and care, which is for me something that's super exciting. And so it's something that's very valued within the organization. And it's just, yeah, I'm very happy for that transition from academia to sort of real world applied design. And I think it's such a wonderful opportunity. So I feel very blessed.
Wow, yeah, that's super interesting to hear about how you felt about the content in academia versus the sort of private sector and product and tech, because it's the same sort of thing, but the different applications and how they fulfilled you in different ways. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to come to you next and ask about how the opportunity of starting Code First Girls came about through some of your experience and entrepreneurial background that you have, how this particularly inspiring social enterprise got up and running.
Well, I think it's worth saying to kick off with is I never necessarily saw myself as a woman in tech. And I think that's really, really important. I think actually, if I look back and ask myself what I wanted to be as a kid, I think the answer probably would have been a fighter pilot. And that's mainly because I watched far too much Top Gun. But that's what I wanted to be. But as a child, if someone had told me, you know what, you sort of, you're quite brave. You don't mind being in male-dominated environments, and you want to do something fun and fast-paced. Actually, on reflection, that's probably some of the best skill sets you can have to enter the world of technology. So I just find it really funny when we talk, particularly to say younger women. There's a lot of people in the industry that seem to think that you need to, have been influenced into STEM from the age of 5, otherwise you're a write-off, right? Unless we get all these girls into STEM from the age of 5, that's it. They're not going into technology. And I hope and living proof that is simply not the case. There are so many fantastic young women that didn't come down the sort of traditional career trajectory that are doing incredibly well. To make it worse, not only did I sort of not study STEM-based subjects. When I went to university, I ended up studying English and history, which, believe me, I mean, that is like, at the time, you're like, you're on the scrap heap of careers because you're also a creative, and people are like, oh, there's just nothing down for her. But again, that's simply not true, because there's just so many ways in which you can apply yourself. So I ended up actually in summers going into my mum's business. My mum was an entrepreneur really sort of strong female role model in my life. And literally in summers, I learned things like P&L and how to build products and how to react to clients. And I did that, around my mum, which is pretty challenging, by the way. I'm sure for anybody out there that's listening to this, they'll know those challenges. And then after sort of graduating uni, I started to get into the sort of educational technology space. And after a couple of years of doing that, I ended up being one of the founding European team members for lynda.com. Now, lynda.com was not a very well-known name in the UK or in fact across EMEA. But as I came to realize, it was very much a household name in the US. And yeah, I was not only sort of the only woman on that sort of management team, but I was also the youngest person. And trust me, if there's ever a woman that's lived imposter syndrome, that's me. I hear these stats that sort of 90% of women experience imposter syndrome. I think for that whole segment of my life, it was probably about 90% imposter syndrome. I would walk in the door and I'd be like, at what point are they going to rumble me? At what point are they going to realize? But actually, whilst I was so preoccupied with those thoughts, we were just doing incredibly well. The product was fantastic. We were growing like 100% year on year, and it just sort of snowballed. And then we got the news that we were being bought by LinkedIn, and we became the world's first edtech unicorn. So that was fantastic, and that was an amazing journey. But after that, I ended up going into sort of various sort of entrepreneurial roles, starting up my own things. And Code4Fast Girls sort of came about in that period. And for me, when I looked at that, I was like, what a fantastic opportunity, because that's actually channeling things that I've felt and experienced for years into doing something good and actually making a practical change. So our kind of philosophy at Code4Fast Girls is, stop talking about it and actually start acting on it. By the way, that doesn't make me the best programmer in the world. I have it on good authority that my 89-year-old grandfather is much more proficient in Python than I am. But we still give women the skills, the absolute skills, even if it's the leadership skills in tech around leading a business or starting a business. We want to provide women with the skills and sort of inspiration to be able to enter into the space with, women that look, sound, and think far more like they do, and what they think the image of technology is, and inspiring that next generation. And there are some fantastically talented women out there.
Amazing, thank you. I want to go to Gina next and ask specifically about some of the challenges that you encounter in Latin America for tech entrepreneurs. Anna talked about imposter syndrome, and I think that's something that's fairly universal for women. And then also specifically in the tech world, what women tend to think, or what the ideas are about how women in tech get into it, what challenges they have. Is there a specific specific challenges that you would say that people in Latin America have to get into the space, and more specifically for women?
Yeah, so first of all, I just wanted to say that I really identify with everything Anna said. I'm 100% in that box. Like, I never thought of myself as someone who was going to work in tech. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I studied philosophy. It was useless. I didn't know how to use like Excel at the end of it. I'm kidding. I mean, technically, probably I learned some stuff. And yeah, imposter syndrome, like my life motto is fake it till you make it. And I honestly only feel like I know what I'm talking about when I'm like presenting like right in a panel right now. I'm like, look, I'm like a super successful woman in tech, but really the whole time I'm like, don't let them know that I don't know what I'm doing. So totally identify with that. I think that the issues for women in tech are global, but in places outside of first world countries, especially in Latin America included, it's way worse because there's a lot less examples of women who have succeeded. There is a lot of pressure to go to college and meet your husband. I can say 90% of my female friends in Brazil are married with kids. I mean, they're happily married with kids. It's just that it's just a different reality. And going and trying to get a career, like, it's kind of like, why are you doing that? Like, I don't get it. And then things are changing, but slowly. And then with tech, and STEM, the rates are even lower. So it's hard to feel like you have a chance when, everyone in the department is male, as it's been all over the world, but here I think a little bit worse. In terms of being a tech entrepreneur here, much like in the rest of the world, but worse, all the VCs are male. So, you're trying to raise money, you're in a room trying to pitch, especially if you're doing something like, well, you're in a bind, because like either you're doing something that's just like, you're just a tech entrepreneur, and then these men are likely to think like, why are you the best person to do this? Or you're doing something like femtech, which is like technology for women, and then men are like, I don't get why that's relevant, that seems niche. And you're like, that's more than 50% of the population. But again, things are changing just very slowly. There's one fund here, or a couple maybe led by women, and I'm really trying to help with that. In terms of broader challenges in Latin America, there's fewer funds, so there's less experience. Partners seldom have operational background, especially because there's just less successful unicorns or tech companies coming out of the region. It's a little club, so if you talk to a VC and they don't like you, they probably like talk to the other VC, and like it's kind of just hard to break in. In terms of the region as a whole, it's very bureaucratic. So for example, in Brazil, it can take months to open a company, which is, it's a lot of time and money. And then it's really hard to find experienced talent locally, especially great engineers, because there's just, again, less instances of successful companies here. Most of the top universities are still abroad. There's some really great ones here, but most of the best ones are still abroad. And then the smartest people still tend to go into consulting and banking, and convincing them to leave their high-paying job in a world where like our currency is super volatile and there's less instances of success. It's kind of hard. And the last thing I'll say is that it's, the law is some kind of ridiculous sometimes, and I see a lot of entrepreneurs who are constantly trying to be at the edge of like what it means to not break the law, but like almost break the law. So it's a little bit of a Wild West, and you have to be bold. But on the other hand, I will say that the reason I am focusing on the region is because I think there's tremendous opportunity right now for tech, and the next 10 years are going to be huge.
Yeah, I think
especially for women
is a positive thing in the tech space, right? And representation matters, I think, is what I took from the first part of your answer, and I think that should be obvious to everyone at this point, and everybody understands why, or at least I think women understand why representation matters.
Yeah, I'll just, Jade, just one thing, like representation matters not just because it's the right thing and because we deserve it, et cetera, but because there's so much business opportunity, there's so much money to be made, there's so much money to be created. So if you want to look at it from a purely business perspective, that's one thing I want to say. Absolutely,
thank you. Martina, I'm coming to you with a 3-part question. I hope you're ready. One of the recent titles that I saw on LinkedIn was Change Lead, which I thought was brilliant. So I wanted to ask you what you enjoy about being that force for change inside an organization. And then following on from that, how important do you think change management is in the world of product and tech? And then finally, what kind of leader you are. So
try to take them one at a time.
Yeah, what do you enjoy about being a force for change, and how important do you think it is change management in tech specifically first? And then I'd love to find out a bit more about what type of leader you are.
Lovely. I could also just echo what Gina said. Like, I agree with everything Gina said, but also what Anna said about like if I could traject my career when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pilot. So like, I'm not doing anything of that right now, which is quite interesting. I mean, you find yourself in positions and in situations where you learn to like something else. And obviously here we all are. So I think it's super interesting. And I could also spend hours asking Anna, like, why don't more women come into the coding area? I could like spend the whole webinar on that question. But okay, so first off then, what do I enjoy about being the force of change? And the change leader position that you were talking about, that was my previous job when I was just working for SEB, kind of the bigger bank. And I mean, what I enjoy about that is, I think, giving the opportunity to have an impact of changing an organization to the better. I mean, at the speed that the technical development is running right now, I think it's crucial for organizations to be able to adapt and to change their way they're thinking, pivot the way they're developing the product, changing the tech base in order to make use of the technologies available. So I think being part of kind of that change and driving that, it's quite interesting, because it's also, I've been working for just a few years, but the tech space has been changing so much during those years already. So I think it's a luxury of being part, or at least being alive in an era where we are looking to, self-driving cars, ed tech products, which is vitally changing the way we're looking to education. I can watch movies and they're taking place in the 70s. You go like, oh, I wish I could be alive in the 70s. But here's like, I'm really happy that I get to be alive in an era where change and the technical development is running at that speed. I think it's super interesting. So for me, it's kind of a self-fulfillment, and I also feel like I'm doing something better for my organization, but also for the world, and at least exploring the advantages of the tech development. Then you had another question.
Yeah, I think you've covered the first two actually there, so thank you for
okay.
that. But finally, what kind of leader you are, and sort of your journey in becoming a leader in this space?
Yeah, I think that's also a question that should be mostly answered by the people I'm leading, so it's hard to say yourself. But I think in the tech space today, building products today, it's a lot about tech, regardless of what kind of product you're building. I'm building financial products, but I mean, if you're building whatever product, the technical infrastructure and how you choose to build your product based on the tech is crucial to make sure you kind of fulfill the purposes with your product. And the tech space today is huge. I mean, as a leader, I think my standpoint, or like where I want to be, is like, I want to be humble about the fact that I do not know all these tech. It's like, I cannot do it. Like, it's UX, it's design, it's data, it's cloud, it's infrastructure, it's security. It's like, it's a whole thing. It's like, my role is mostly about being, supportive and fair and motivating to the people that are experts in these areas. I mean, I want to create an environment where they could be the best versions of themselves, where they could feel like they can ask questions, where they can feel involved. I want to be transparent, and I want to, create a place where they can be the best in their professions. So I think leading, at least for me, in the technology space, is a lot about being supportive. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that is.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you. I think that really, really resonates with me about what the kind of leaders that I've had, who I have really appreciated and who I feel have lifted me up and enabled me to move forward in my career in such a fast-moving world of tech. So thank you. Right, we've got 5 minutes left. I knew we'd be squeezed for time. And there's a couple of questions that I wanted to ask everybody. So I want to check in with everyone finally on what demotivates you professionally and what you do to address it. And then also, if you could, let us know what you think the outcome or the end game is of the changes that we are trying to make as leaders and females in tech. So what are we trying to get to? And I'm going to start with Emily, if I can. A couple of minutes each we've got for this.
So the demotivation question first. Company politics. I'm really bad at company politics, and I get very annoyed with company politics, because quite often I find that it hinders development, and it hinders us actually facing problems and looking at, when you develop IT, you're usually facing really big, complicated and complex problems. And so if too much company politics gets in the way of that, then basically we're not looking at the problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to maintain a system that doesn't really necessarily want to solve anything. So that's sometimes that can really that can bring me down. So but not that often. I usually just voice my opinion about it. And then to your second question, what is it that we're trying to achieve? I'm hoping that we're trying to get to leverage the best brains in the world. I've never really understood, and maybe that was why I've never really understood myself as a woman. That sounds really depressing, probably to a lot of people, but it comes. But it's more like I just don't. I understand myself as a slightly weird human being who's trying to sort like things out, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be. And maybe that sort of not knowing that has actually opened up that I've allowed myself to look at things slightly differently. And I've always had the feeling, you know, the best marathon runners in the world, if you take the top 10 women and the top 10 men, they're going to kick everybody else's asses, right? And it doesn't really, that whole competition between men being inherently faster than women, it doesn't interest me. So for me, it's always, we want the best people doing the best things possible, because then we have the best people solving the difficult problems. And at the end of the day, I think that's at least what that's what I'm supporting.
Great answer. Thank you, Emily. Next, can we ask Anna, what demotivates you, what you do to address it, and what are the outcomes that you're focused on?
Bullies really demotivate me, and I hate to say it, they're in every setting and where you least expect them. So I can think I'm not going to do a naming and shaming exercise here as much as I'd like to on the mixed panel, International Women's Day. But there are a whole plethora of bullies in every realm of what you do. Particularly, I hate to say it can become even harder if you feel like you're one of the few women entering into the technology space. We talked about investors earlier. It's absolutely brutal. Sit down and tell me one female entrepreneur that hasn't come across a complete bully of an investor. That really does get to me, because I find bullying very much stifles creativity and also can drive out some incredibly talented people. So when I see that, the way I address it personally in my own life is that I try and take it on very directly. And I also try and call it out when I see it around other people. I try and do my best to call it out on behalf of them as well. I think that's really important, that you don't just stand up for yourself, that you stand up for others. So yeah, I would say that is one of the most demotivating things I've ever seen for a lot of women in tech. And the second question, remind me of the second question.
What's the end game for you? Where are we trying to get to with these changes that we're trying to make?
So I had a bit of feedback recently. So a lot of our women sort of end up in doing like sprints or tech sprints, or helping to sort of create products alongside big companies. And a lot of big companies are also experimenting as to what that means as well. But some of the feedback I had recently is that basically when you're putting a lot of our women from the Code First Girls communities in the mix to help build products, or look at certain ways to visualize data, for example, the product and the data set is only as good as you have involvement and representation from numerous underrepresented groups. But what we really noticed is that when the women were working alongside, we had some big organizations like Google and IBM, the feedback was, you know what, we never would have thought about this in terms of a way of looking at a product or a way of looking at a data set. The women were coming up with ideas that quite simply weren't being thought about previously. And I think that's a really important point to capture, is that with bringing sort of diversity to the fold and underrepresented groups to the fold and actually getting them involved in the creation of products, you're really looking at that kind of like intersectionality of complete innovation. And unless we do that, we're really going to struggle to create something that works for everyone. I'm reading a great book at the moment, and it's about what sort of elephants and pandemics have in common to drive about entrepreneurship and innovation. And you'd never think they would have anything in common, but we need to bring in sometimes disparate elements to create something new and exciting.
Fantastic. We're going to need the name of that book. The Best Brains and Complete Innovation. Amazing. Next, Gina, please. What demotivates you? How do you address it? And what are the end games and outcomes that you're working towards?
I'm really demotivated by feeling really undervalued and working for people I don't respect, which is why I tend to gravitate towards being an entrepreneur, because I just don't like having a boss that I don't think knows more than I do. And I'm not paid to say this because this is a mixed panel, but I think the most demotivating thing as a leader in product is wrong data. Like knowing that you can't trust the data and that no one really knows where to find the right data, and constantly like having that change under your feet. It just feels like you're running towards nowhere all the time. So in terms of, feeling undervalued and working for someone I don't respect, be really aware of that. Consider leaving and finding a better opportunity. I also really urge anyone on this call to seriously consider who their boss is going to be for any job they're going to have. First and foremost, I think that's the most important relationship you'll have. It's almost more important than the actual work in my book. In terms of the outcome, I would love it to be the case that we don't really have these panels in the future, because it's so obvious, because women are part of it. I want women to not be treated as minorities, because we're not. It's like, whoa, where are the women in tech? It's like, we're more than 50% of the population. It's not that weird. And so, I think that's the end game: equal representation, equal opportunities, equal funding, equal pay. And as I think Anna touched on, definitely more than white women having opportunities and a lot more representation on that front too.
And then it's just something we never have to talk about, and it's the problem solved and it's fixed. And women are everywhere in tech, women from all different backgrounds, and we live in a paradise of equal representation. I think that's definitely something that we can hope for.
Isn't that crazy?
One day.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just learned one little anecdote. At Duolingo, we had a team of all male designers, and then finally we were trying to hire a designer. We kept trying to hire a designer. They couldn't find a designer, and they interviewed a bunch of people. They didn't like anyone until finally the CEO said, "Can we bring in a female designer?" And suddenly everyone had ideas that they hadn't thought of designers they knew, and we had ended up hiring one of those designers, and she was our first female designer. But she was a designer that was accepted out of there were 10 men in front of her, and no one thought of her, only because she was in the category female designer in their head. So I want that to not be the case anymore. That's what we're driving towards.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great story. Martina, finally, what demotivates you? How do you address it? And what are the outcomes that you're working towards?
Loving it. When I got the questions in advance, I read what motivates you. So I have a super good answer for what motivates me, but not for what demotivates me. So I was just like quickly in my head now. So what's demotivating me? No, but it's a very good question. It makes actually more sense to ask that rather than what motivates you. I think, echoing a bit on what the other said, but I mean, company politics, to Emily's point, I think that's kind of unavoidable in big organizations. It drives me crazy, because it's like very seldom the company politics allows you to go or do things to the most intuitive or the easiest ways. Like you kind of have to walk around things all the time. It's just like doesn't make sense to me. So I would like, if I in a totally like perfect world, I would take that away. I also think obviously inequality, or what we've been touching upon, where we have to kind of take the female perspective into consideration. Like you said, Gina, with the designer, like, should we have a female designer? I don't think that should be a question. It's be like, should we have a designer or not? It's like, why is that? I mean, drives me crazy as well. Otherwise, the way things are going slow, you try to do something, you do your best. It's like keep getting stuck in whatever committees or processes or structures or whatever. I think that's super demotivating. And when people tend to overcomplicate things, like make things more kind of tangle up than they are. And how do I address it? I'm just checking to my little cheating note here on the side that I just wrote. But I mean, I think on the taking the inequality thing, like when we are highlighting, let's bring in a female designer, like we're highlighting girls. I mean, being a girl in the tech and product space, I wouldn't say that I'm super unequally treated, but it's been situations where I felt like I've been treated away because I am a female. And I would not be the one saying that everybody has, but at least I can speak for myself. And I mean, being fair and address these things directly, actually standing up for who you are. I mean, I think it's a question of generation. It's like maybe wouldn't throw my mother and father under the bus, but maybe their generation would be more accepting to that situations, like, because that's the way it's always been. I think coming in as a young woman, or fairly young girls, we are young, kind of showing, being a role model and saying like, guys, this is not okay. I mean, this is something that maybe was accepted 30 years ago. In my generation, it's not accepted. And I mean, helping people or teammates around me to kind of face those situations by being a role model myself in those things. I'd say that's something that I find quite rewarding, at least for myself, to being able to drive that type of change. And also, I think it's an important society question to address.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You certainly are a role model, I think, from all the women on the panel today. The topics that we've touched on, your journeys and how you arrived here. There's so many inspirational moments and stories and realizations along the way. So really thank you for sharing all your experiences. We have got a few minutes left, and I do want to take a couple of questions from the attendees. So we've got a question which I think I'm going to pose to Anna about how you deal with working when there's a bro culture within the team. I wonder if this is something that you might experience in teams of software developers.
Don't we love the bro culture? I mean, I love it. How do we deal with the bro culture? So one thing that we always do that's really, really important, that if you're thinking about talent and things like that, we tend to buddy women up in situations. So we get asked all the time, you know, can you put these software developers into this organization or these data professionals? And these women are coming from absolute scratch in terms of their skill set. So we're giving them the skills. And then what we find is we buddy them up, at least with one other woman in the program. If we can get a whole team of them, great. So it's my absolute objective sometimes to say to these companies when they're asking for just like a couple of women, I'm like, you're going to take 10 and they're going to be together and they're all going to be in a supportive ecosystem together. And that's what's going to happen because you have a gazillion men. So basically putting women in groups is really, really important, and making women feel that they're supported. I'm telling you now, if you take on one female software developer, one female data professional in our field, and she's young, she's really, really going to struggle in terms of that ecosystem. The second thing that we do is that we never introduce women into an organization unless they've got mentorship attached. So somebody that they can come to independently, constantly, to help them with their own professional development, and also with their own, you know, transparent, potentially, you know, personal ways about how they feel about being in a male-dominated culture. Doing those two things works absolute wonders, because it's not just about getting women through the door. It's then how you create an environment where women feel valued. And those two things have had fantastic results for us.
And two such simple solutions, but that you can understand immediately how much of an impact just making sure that those two things happen would have. Okay, so I know we're at time, but I wanted to take a couple of other questions, unless I'm going to be told that we're not supposed to. But I also wanted to ask the question in the chat to Gina, if I could ask you what advice you'd have for emerging women leaders in tech. So what are some of the things that you tell women to think about and try to do actively in order to progress their career in tech?
So I think, first of all, remember that most men apply to jobs that they're not qualified for. So if you see a job opportunity that sounds interesting and you're not qualified for it, apply anyway. All you need is one opportunity if you're trying to get into tech. And so even if you get a lot of no's, all you need is one yes. Don't be afraid to sell yourself. I think women are kind of very afraid of like talking positively about themselves. I introduced myself at the beginning of the session as if I'm like this amazing person. I have this photo with Obama on my LinkedIn. I'm like such a badass, but I could just retell this whole story, which was like the complete, like I could tell this completely differently. Trust me, like I dropped out of college and I could really go into like all the things that didn't work out. Find the ways that make you look impressive and don't be afraid to talk about those, because that's how people talk about themselves, and that's the only way you're really going to get a chance. Always negotiate. Even if you think, you know, you're so lucky to have this job, if you don't negotiate, they will think lesser of you. I think the most important one is don't underestimate networking and developing relationships. reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and just meeting for coffee or Zoom date for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. The world goes and comes around, and you just don't know when those relationships are going to bubble back up, and all businesses are made of people. And then, yeah, I think that's the one that's really helped me the most in my career. And I kind of was by accident. I just like meeting people, but it's helped. Honestly, all the jobs I got were because I knew someone who introduced me to someone who recommended me to someone. I never actually got a job from applying. So yeah. And then the last one that is one I struggle with is don't take things personally at work. It's really tough for me, but just remember that people have their issues, and if they're being weird and rude and whatever and bullies, it's because they have their own issues. It has nothing to do with you, and that's easier to deal.
Self-promotion, networking, they're important. We need to do them, and also being kind to yourself is what I took from that answer. Well, no one's telling me to stop, so I'm going to ask another question because I'm enjoying this discussion. I'm going to ask you, Emily, if you were talking to a young woman entering into the tech world, would you recommend it, and why? Is a question that we've had in the chat. This is going to be the last one, I'm being told.
Oh, okay. Yes, I would. I think tech is amazing, and I've spent 15 years in this industry, and every time I start a new project, I'm struck by this feeling of not knowing, and I'm having to figure everything out one more time. I don't like, and that. So if you're into continued growth, and that's not just in terms of on the outside, but on the inside, I really truly believe that like the tech industry is a place to go. And I'm intrinsically driven with the work that I do. I'm incredibly curious, and technology, because of the pace, because of the problems that we're trying to solve and the ways that we're trying to solve them, it keeps growing. So you can keep growing with tech, and I don't see that trend stopping at any time. I do think be careful not to pigeonhole yourself, be careful not to sort of go into one bubble. I think what makes, and I think all of the women on this panel with each are sort of different story. It's be creative, and creativity requires breadth. So like this being able to sort of dance around a problem from different angles, I think technology allows us to do that. And so, and that would be my suggestion. Yes, become a developer, but do it for a couple of years and then try a different, try data science, try graphic design, trying usability. I encourage people to kind of move out of their comfort zones, and technology and tech as an industry allows us to do that, I believe.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Everybody should check out Emily's TEDx talk on insightful design as well, because it's very, very interesting. She talks about a lot of those themes. And I have to close there. I can't thank you all enough, the panelists, for joining us this morning. It's been a really great discussion. I knew we'd run out of time. And thank you also to everybody that attended. I hope you got something out of it. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all the questions, but we are going to be discussing internally at Mixpanel how we can do more things like this, more conversations where we can just get together and share our thoughts and experiences. And we will, of course, be sharing this recording of this webinar in the next day or two. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for participating in the chat. Thank you again to the panelists. Have a wonderful day and a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.